It is my sincere pleasure to introduce John Sallet as our featured speaker today. John currently serves as the General Counsel at the FCC, and he recently argued at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit to defend the agency's net neutrality rule. Previously, Mr. Sallet was a partner at O'Melveny & Myers, and was a partner at Jenner & Block & Miller, Cassidy, LaRocca, and Lewin. In 2008, he served on President Obama's transition team for technology and economic development at the Department of Commerce. I want to keep the intro short and let John speak. Of note, he will not be available for a Q&A session following his remarks. And with that, it's an honor to introduce Mr. Sallet.
I apologize for the fact that because we're running late and I need to get back to try to keep Phil Revere in check, that I'm going to just give this speech and run. But listen, having listened to the last panel and having heard Phil and Jamelia answer so many questions, I don't think there are any left to which I could add anything. But I do appreciate the chance to appear here today, and I want to give views that, of course, are my own, not necessarily the Commission's. It's obviously important to talk about broadband competition. The discussions today are important in that regard. We know the internet today, and this is a truism, right, is the platform on which modern communication is based. Commerce, companionship, societal values, social media, economic growth, educational opportunity, just to name some. In the middle of all of it today is video, now the dominant form of traffic on the web, from all kinds of sources, from aspiring singers and cat videos to instructions of all kinds to the highest gloss entertainment, and on devices of all types. What does it say about an age in which we live that somebody like me picks up his iPad to watch a Red Sox game instead of walking 20 feet to a TV, even though I could score steps on my Fitbit? So today what I'd like to do is to focus on the rise of streaming video, which has replaced the mail DVD, which itself replaced the video store, which itself replaced the black and white television on which once appeared Uncle Milty. It hasn't been that long since there was a Blockbuster store in every neighborhood, but in terms of video entertainment, it was years ago. Things are moving fast. The basic point I'd like to just make is that video competition is at the heart of intertwined policy choices that both separately and together can shape the extent to which consumers reap the benefit of video options. Standing by itself, new video delivery options and business models can provide additional choices, new forms of value. But equally important, video programming stands at the core of the open internet these days, given the incentive and ability of broadband providers to limit the threat from over-the-top video to their own pay TV offerings. And video programming can play an important role as well in the advent of broadband competition, as the Commission observed, as Jamelia explained, in the recent review of the AT&T DirecTV merger. So if we get video competition questions right, then we're more likely to maintain an open internet for consumers who are reaping the benefits of investment and innovation, alongside business models that, in the words of the Open Internet Order, are, quote, busy being born. The obvious, but nonetheless important point, is that streaming video services use the broadband networks owned and operated by incumbent video providers. What's good in the short term for the pay TV services of cable companies and telcos may not be good for consumers who wish to use their broadband connections to reach streaming video services. But consumers have the legitimate right to expect that the data they seek will be transmitted to them, to quote the Communications Act, without change in the form or content of the information as sent and received. A customer who orders King Lear from Amazon doesn't expect the broadband provider to stop and edit it along the way in order to insert a happy ending. Over the past few years, it's become clear that streaming video provided over the internet has the potential to someday become a viable and sustainable substitute for traditional packages of services from the cable company. And the evidence is growing all of us in our individual consumption of video may be able to prove this point, but objective evidence demonstrates that the television market is undergoing a significant transaction. According to the Lightman Research Group, 2014 marked the second consecutive year for overall pay TV industry subscription losses, a trend that's continued in 2015. That was the year as well, and Chairman Wheeler noted this in his speech to the NCTA earlier in the year. 2014 was the crossover point when cable companies as a group had more broadband customers than video customers. Meanwhile, the number of Netflix subscribers in the United States has risen to over 40 million. Hulu reports 9 million subscribers. And recently, Sandvine estimated that streaming video and audio traffic now constitutes 70% of peak downstream internet traffic in North America. 75% of American households have a broadband connection, and the number of broadband homes without a traditional pay TV subscription is now estimated at about 12 million people, 12 million households. So this has obviously been a subject of a lot of commentary, and for some time we've heard a debate about whether there'll be a bundle or would there'll be a la carte offerings, sort of channel by channel or program by program. There may be a third, or maybe many third, or fourth, or fifth alternatives. We're seeing video distributors like Dish with Sling TV offering slim bundles, but slim bundles to consumers. While traditional programmers have jumped into the marketplace with offerings such as CBS All Access, HBO Now, and Showtime. AT&T and Verizon are working to expand streaming rights for the mobile environment. And AT&T says it will specifically try to reach the 30 million homes without a pay TV package. Was it last week that Amazon announced that the ability to add on services to its video services, channels like, or packages like Showtime and Stars? And large programmers like Disney, CBS, and HBO seem willing to experiment with new delivery models. The reason I emphasize this is the marketplace may produce multiple choices, multiple different ideas, some of which will work and some of which won't. But of course, this is what one would hope to see from business model innovation enabled by the internet and the availability of consumer broadband. So what's the FCC's role? It's obvious that alternatives are coming to the marketplace, and they may succeed, they may fail. But they have an opportunity to add new forms of value to consumers. It is not the job of the FCC to decide which business model succeeds. It is our job to consider, within the limits of statutory authority, how to remove artificial barriers to improve consumer choice, to competition, and to innovation. So what I'd like to do in a few minutes is walk through a few examples of how and why the Commission has acted and may continue to act in various ways to remove artificial barriers. I'm going to talk about a series of practices that include practices in the broadband network, like blocking and throttling, practices in the exchange of internet traffic, retail terms and conditions offered to consumers, like data caps, questions that the Commission has dealt with in the past about programming contracts, and finally, a short word or two about set-top boxes. Starting with what one might call pathways and gates. As we worked on our open internet order, the Commission focused on broadband internet access providers that offer the pathway between consumers and edge providers. This is an important point. Consumers today largely use their broadband connections as a pathway to third-party websites, applications, content, services. It's like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? She took the yellow brick road as a path to get to the Emerald City. It wasn't the same as the Emerald City. There was a pathway and there was a destination. And today, that is largely how consumers use their broadband connections, to reach separate independent destinations. As the Commission found in both 2010 and then again in its 2015 Open Internet Order, broadband providers have the power to act as gatekeepers with incentive and ability to curb edge traffic. In this regard, it's important to look at two gates, as it were. The residential connection, where consumers are able to use broadband through the terms and conditions of their subscriptions, and also the interconnection points, where broadband providers receive edge content, video content. That's why, in addition to the bright line rules that are found in the Open Internet Order, no blocking, no throttling, no paid prioritization, the Commission adopted standards to review, if necessary, the interconnection practices of broadband providers, although it was careful to say that it would wait and watch as markets develop. Nonetheless, the potential for harm seems clear here. Take this example. The no blocking rule prevents a broadband provider from denying a consumer the ability to order a video from a particular edge provider. But that same outcome could, in theory, be achieved if the broadband provider, instead of blocking the traffic on its network, simply refused to receive the traffic over an interconnection point. Of course, whether such a set of facts will arise remains to be seen. But I think this goes to demonstrate the Commission's view that broadband connections are the indispensable conduit by which consumers will be able to use streaming video. And so if broadband providers could interfere with online video distributors in an artificial manner, that could be a means of protecting incumbent video revenues. By eliminating the possibility for such artificial activities, the Open Internet Order promotes competition on the basis of innovation and product features, not through blocking or throttling or unreasonably interfering with over-the-top competitors. In other words, if a broadband competitor wants to compete in the market against new forms of value, then it does so, well, with better programming or a different bundle or with new features, which is how one would hope competition would work. In fact, innovation appears to be accelerating since we instituted the Open Internet protections and they came into effect this summer. We've seen new announcements concerning the ability of mobile users to gain access to streaming video without running into usage allowances, the ability of consumers to stream video content provided by their cable system. The Commission, of course, hasn't had the occasion to consider the potential for benefit or harm of any of these new practices. And that brings us to the way that the so-called general conduct rule is constructed, carefully, I would say, on a case-by-case, fact-intensive basis. The goal here, and what we believe is the reality, is a world of permissionless, I can't say it, but permissionless innovation that comes both from the edge and from broadband networks. And that, it would seem, is the best way to provide consumer benefit. Now, I mentioned before retail terms and conditions. Let me say a word about this, which Jamelia may already have mentioned. I came in after the beginning of your panel. In the merger which Jamelia so expertly ran for the Commission conditioned approval of the transaction in order to expressly prevent one type of discrimination related to over-the-top video. Specifically, AT&T is prohibited from excluding its affiliated video services and content from data caps on fixed broadband connections. That came about because one of the asserted benefits of the merger from AT&T's perspective was the launch of affiliated over-the-top video services. Those kinds of new over-the-top services would directly compete with other over-the-top services, a good thing. But as it happened, at the time of the merger, AT&T was alone among the large ISPs in applying set data caps on fixed broadband services. And so the Commission put into place a condition that prevents AT&T from using its broadband service retail terms and conditions, in other words, exclusions from data caps, to discriminate against new forms of unaffiliated video competition. Let me say a word about access to programming. This came up in one particular context. In the review of the Comcast-NBCU merger, questions were raised, and under the particular circumstances presented by that transaction, I'm going to repeat that dependent clause, just to be safe. Under the particular circumstances presented by that transaction, the Commission and the DOJ worked to clear the way for more online delivery by prohibiting Comcast from employing so-called alternative distribution method clauses, also known as ADM clauses, in programming agreements that would have the effect of limiting, right, these are the agreements between a company like Comcast and the programmers, say the major studios. Such a clause would have the effect of limiting a programmer's ability to supply its programming to over-the-top providers. And the elimination of these kinds of clauses is found within the conditions still in effect after the Comcast-NBCU merger. As I said, I want to say just a word about devices before I close, because it is worthwhile considering what the role of devices also is in fueling new innovation and consumer value. Now, we know that there are some over-the-top services, providers, Amazon, Apple, they're supplying their own devices for streaming video services. But the role of the set-top box remains important. It's been estimated that 99% of pay TV subscribers lease their set-top boxes from their service provider. This is a crowd that would actually know this citation, but I'll give it to you anyway. Section 629 of the Communications Act broadly authorizes the Commission to ensure the commercial availability of retail navigation devices while protecting the security of the pay TV provider's transmission, which is important. In the stellar legislation, I'm from Boston, so for me, the difference between the stellar legislation and the stellar legislation is essentially indecipherable, but I mean the more recent one. In that legislation, Congress directed the Commission to establish a Downloadable Security Technical Advisory Committee, the so-called DSTAC, to recommend ways in which downloadable security can promote the statutory objective. The committee's report recommended possible approaches, and in August, the Commission sought comment on the report. Right now, the Commission staff is reviewing the report and the comments to consider how competition in set-top boxes can best be promoted going forward. Last topic, and I think I'll be within a few minutes of your scheduled end time. Look, it's worth talking about competitive structures just for a moment. And I just want to, this is not the only place where questions of competition can arise, but I want to just take a minute to review some data about fixed broadband connections. At the end of 2014, only about a third of residential broadband consumers had a choice of providers at speeds of at least 25 megabits per second downstream. The other two-thirds either had only one provider or no provider at all. And in rural areas, the situation was worse. As we looked at it last year, over half of rural Americans, I actually live in a rural area, so this is an area of this speech in which I'm, other than the Fitbit, in which I'm personally acquainted, but as of last year, over half of rural American households did not have access to this speed. We're hopeful that has improved, and there will be another report coming out in the new year. But it's problematic to have this kind of divide. And I should say not just for video entertainment, but for other applications. Video can be used for many purposes, including educational ones. It's it's a problem that the Commission identified to have such a significant gap, or having a significant gap, between urban and rural America. There's also a lack of options in terms of the technology that's available. For example, 86% of residential fixed connections at downstream speeds of 25 megs or more on traditional cable plants. So all of this is to say that the circumstances we have seen it has been of limited choice in fixed broadband connections, and that, I would suggest, has particular cogency to the question of broadband providers' incentive abilities and issues around video competition. So let me just conclude. Look, some of us in the room are old enough to remember when the movie The Graduate came out, but I'm not asking those who do to identify themselves, because I understand the Fifth Amendment applies here. But you remember the scene where Benjamin Braddock is talking to a guy who's going to tell him how the world is going to work, and he says it's one word, it's plastics. Pretty sure that the word today is video, right? It's exploding, we're seeing it, we're consuming it, we're seeing original programming, we're seeing Emmy Awards. Hey, we're going to see a new Star Trek series, right? And this is important, and it's also accompanied by all sorts of other video uses. Engineering courses available on video, aspiring singers, teenage sensations, whatever. And in addition, the manner in which different forms of video, and here I'm not focusing as much on long-form video programming, but how people are accessing video is changing, right? People are getting certain kinds of video wherever they are, in home, on the road, in the car, hopefully not driving, but many places all day long. Young people especially want to access the internet wherever they are, and advances in wired and wireless technology can help that. So the Commission is well aware of this changing environment. Its goal is to exercise its network expertise and regulatory authority to eliminate artificial barriers to video competition within the authority granted by statute, and in so doing, empower consumers to have more value delivered to them, to exercise their ability to select among that new kind of offering, but also to promote broadband's unique role in enabling innovation and innovation and innovation after that. So you've had a long day. You've heard from a lot of distinguished people. I appreciate you letting me end the day for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And that concludes the conference. We're going to have informal drinks across the street at the Hamilton. So thank you so much to everyone for coming, in particular our speakers from the FCC. Thanks again.